Good evening, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and call us to order and get us started. Please feel free to keep going back and getting food. And I know some of you are here who called today and said, we didn't register, so we'll come and not eat. There's plenty of food, so please eat and go get coffee if you need it. We are going to do a lot of numbers tonight. So there's coffee back there if you need it through the evening. I'm going to open us with a word of prayer. Would you all pray with me? Lord God, every good gift comes from you, and we have been blessed with good gifts beyond even our understanding and awareness and beyond any measure. Thank you for all the gifts that sustain this place, that call us into service, that show love in your world. Thank you for these faithful members who have come for more understanding, seeking the call you have for this congregation for the coming year. Bless the food, bless the hands that prepared it, bless our conversation, and as we go, make us into faithful disciples. In Christ's holy name we pray. Amen. I'm going to set a couple of expectations for our evening together and to name our goals. I'm not sure whether this has ever happened in Trinity's past, but I'm told that this is certainly not a regular thing in Trinity's recent past to have a town hall about finances. We're going to make it so. One of our goals tonight is to root ourselves in gratitude, to remember that within our body of people in this family of faith, we have the resources we need. We are supported by many gifts and many generous gifts of time and talent. And tonight we're going to focus in particular on the treasure, but time and talent go together with that. And we remember tonight that we do not have to live in a place of fear or scarcity. But we also have to make talking about money more part of our regular practice as a community, even if Southerners were taught not to do that because it is uncomfortable and tacky and somebody's going to get offended. We're going to have to do it a little bit because we share responsibility for the future of this place, and this is part of this place. We are at an amazing moment, I think, in the life of this church, one that I feel very excited about and hopeful about. I hope you all share that sense of hope. Oh, wow, that was a really sad... That's what I get for asking. That was a really sad expression of hope, friends. Do we feel hopeful about the future of this congregation? Yes, we do. We are growing. We are growing in multiple ways, not just in adding people to our roles, which we are, people at multiple age points, which is wonderful. We're also growing in our mission relationships and in our activities and in how we think about worship and fellowship. And this growth is so energizing and so important for a church to keep moving forward. And having that kind of activity and supporting all the ministries that come with growth means, of course, some finances that have to be in place to do that. So our second goal for the night, first was gratitude. Second is to name the opportunity in front of us. And I'm using that word intentionally. We may once, in the past history of this church, have had the luxury of having most of our financial needs met without a lot of concern. I know there have been seasons when the budget was carried by a series of very large gifts and a lot of long and faithful giving by some of our oldest members. We no longer have a culture here as a church where if the HVAC breaks, I go knock on someone's door and leave their house with a check. That doesn't happen now. First of all, if I did that, I'm not sure I could walk away with a check. That isn't the culture we live in anymore. And second, even if we went about finances that way, that would prevent us from realizing the very important goal of having every member of our church participate in giving and having the way to express their gratitude for God's blessings. Another thing to name tonight as an opportunity in front of us is that some of those long, older, and totally devoted members who have supported this church with their gifts are passing on to their eternal rest. So we need to be honest. We need to know together what we hold, and we need to be thinking in terms of future generations so that as those folks who have been so faithful are no longer offering their financial support, we are still in a position to move forward with what God is calling us to do. So tonight, everything you're going to hear is good news. There are zero secrets here. I want to be very clear. There is no financial secret at this church. Everything that we have is yours to know, and it actually is available to you on a regular basis. And this conversation is going to present a lot of numbers tonight. They are to be celebrated. We have a lot for which to give thanks. We're also going to be honest about what we are going to need if we continue to grow and if we want to be nimble in responding to the needs of our church and to God's call on our community. I want to start with a couple of words of thanks, as you know I like to do. Every person who's given to this church, time, talent, and treasure, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So many things that are seemingly automatic here could not happen if we did not have generous members and friends. I also want to thank the leaders who are going to give you a lot of information tonight. I'm going to name them in order of appearance as they do in the credits. Richard O'Donnell, who's a sitting elder and chair of our finance committee right now. Mark Stansel, not currently sitting, but elder, past chair of finance and currently chairing our associate pastor nominating committee. Thank you, sir. Margaret Reiser, who's the chair of our board of trustees, and Heather Edmiston, our exceptional director of finance and administration. These folks do this all the time. There isn't a day that goes by when we are not looking at the financial health and needs of this church. Thank you all for your leadership and for your willingness to talk about this tonight. We're going to get outcomes in just a few minutes. We have them. I'm going to share outcomes in a few minutes from our 2024 commitment campaign. I know you're on the edge of your seats, but you're going to have to wait for it. But I want to go ahead and thank right now Stan Tilley and Melissa Mosley, who chaired this year's campaign. I don't think they're in the room, but you all know who I'm talking about. I want to thank Bonnie Harris, who's been such a faithful advisor to that campaign. And I want to thank the folks who stood up during worship, during the early weeks of the campaign and spoke publicly about what it means to them to give as a spiritual discipline. Drew Timmons did, John Tyrrell did, David and Christine Quillian did, who are all here. Thank you all for your openness and vulnerability and for sharing very moving witness. We're going to structure this evening as information first and then have set aside a nice block of time at the end for your questions. So I know things are going to come up as you're listening and maybe learning or maybe getting things that are review. Jot your notes, jot your questions down, and we will take them all together at the end so we can make sure to get through everything we've prepared for you tonight. Again, go ahead and get coffee if you need it. The cookies in the center of your table are to be shared. And if you don't have enough, go snag some from another table. I hope you all have had a chance to introduce yourselves and meet, because every time we gather is an opportunity for fellowship and deepened connections in our church. And now we're going to start with a section on Trinity's financial health and what our finance committee does all the time. I'm going to invite Richard and Mark up here.
Hello, everybody. As Rebekah said, Mark and I just want to spend a few minutes going over Trinity's financial health and what all that looks like. I think we're kind of numbers people. And so everything that's on the screen up here is also going to be in a packet. I think if you take away nothing else from some of the numbers that we go over, I think it's that Trinity is in an excellent financial position. When we look at the finance committee itself, we've got 14 members. And then you can see the terms and everybody listed. We also have members by virtue of their position, and then obviously the staff contacts. And I wanted to put the mission statement in here because I do think it's important. The committee acts on behalf of the session to ensure the fiscal health of Trinity Presbyterian Church, both short-term and long-term. This committee is responsible for the financial stewardship of the gifts of the people, both operating and capital, in a manner consistent with the theology, values, and commitments of our congregation of the Presbyterian Church of the United States. When we look at the structure of the committee on the next screen, each member is assigned as a liaison to each ministry of the church. And so these liaisons are available throughout the year to act as their designated, or to work with the designated ministry chair. And this is especially important during the budgeting process. If you guys remember in the past, the budgeting process was a little later, and we've worked to pull that forward into the year so that we can finalize a budget earlier in the season. The committee is a standing committee of session, and we have a standard agenda line item with the session every month. And the committee's meeting on a regular basis. Typically, we meet 10 months of the year with no meetings in July and December. But there's a regular group of us, the 14 of us, plus everybody else, that's going over the financial results, spending versus budget. We're going through the assets, the liabilities, the account balances, and then the restricted accounts. So a lot of numbers that we're going through on a monthly basis. And then Carr, Riggs, and Ingram is annually reviewing the fixed assets, the bank reconciliations and statements, and they're also reviewing policies and procedures and things along those lines. We also have miscellaneous odds and ends that come up from an agenda perspective. I think the most recent example would be the committee helped evaluate FDIC insurance for the banks, for the bank cash that the church had, and make sure that, and we moved things around to make sure that the church had 100% FDIC insurance and was also getting the best interest rate possible, just given some of the recent changes. And I want to have Mark talk through some of the numbers and some more details there.
Thanks, Richard. As he said, I would want you to leave tonight knowing that Trinity is in very sound financial health as an organization. We have no debt. There are a lot of large... Quiet crowd. There's a lot of churches, a lot of large churches can't say that, particularly when you think about the phenomenal facilities that we have at Trinity. Our property, which has just been updated. Thank you, Margaret and team. There's just, and all those that contributed to that. It's just an amazing asset that we have that we share with a lot of folks, and we plan to share more going forward. And we have a fully funded operating reserve. I'll speak to that in a little bit deeper detail in just a few moments. One of the things most folks probably don't realize is that about almost 95% of our budget each year comes from annual gifts from the congregation. We do have some trust fund income that we receive each year, but unlike some large churches that have huge endowments that fund a lot of their annual operating expenses, that's not the case with us. And as Rebekah said, I think that's, I'll never forget when I co-chaired commitment with Francis Swinson a number of years ago. Had a great conversation with a longtime dear member of this church, and he said, he didn't want us to ever have such a large endowment that the folks that were members each year didn't contribute and help make the budget each year, because that was an important part of membership and being a part of this community. So just remind folks that that's the case. And obviously, our success from our campaigns drive our budgets each year. That's what allows us to do new things, new folks that we bring into the staff. And so the campaigns do drive our budget. The other parts of our income, again, trust funds gives about 3 to 4% of our annual revenue. We finally get interest again on deposits. So for Trinity, who has a fair number of deposits, that's very meaningful to our budget. And then our building usage for weddings, sports, other outside groups that we do charge fees. We used to do a lot of movie rental revenue, but we hadn't had as much of that lately. And then really, when you think about just like the federal budget, there's really the three key areas of our budget. Personnel, property, and mission account for almost 80% of our budget each year between those three items. Current practices, one things there may be some current perceptions or misperceptions, but one of the great things that Trinity does have is we have a fully funded operating reserve, and our policy is to always maintain a minimum of 3 months of our budget operations in reserve at all times. Back in the early 2000s, coming out of recession, we were finished G2G and we're about to build a lot of this fantastic facility that we use today. Trinity had no reserves. In fact, we on the finance committee, we actually had a line of credit with the bank every year that we would use to fund our operations in the low months during the summer, and then we'd pay it down by the end of the year. Now we self-fund that with our reserve, so we don't have to pay interest to do that because about 50% of our pledged income from members comes in the fourth quarter of the year. That's fine. People have various reasons for that, and we're grateful for those gifts, but we have to pay for all the expenses the rest of the year. So it's nice that we do have that reserve to be able to carry through those lower months during the summer. And one other thing, we do, there are years, and we've had a couple years lately because of staffing vacancies, but we do have years where we have unspent funds from our budget at the end of the year. Back when we developed the operating reserve policy back in the early 2000s, at that time, we developed a policy that any unspent funds, we first made sure that we topped up our operating reserve to make sure we were at 3 months for the coming year. And then anything that was left over after that was at that time was divided 50% between the property reserve and mission reserve. And that's our policy. Now the session also has the opportunity to do something different. And there's been a few situations in the last couple of years where we've had some other needs that were much greater. And so the session approved a modification to that. But that is our current policy. Just one switch over. I just want to throw up the balance sheet. It's just a very, very high level of our balance sheet, but you can see between cash and net property, we have total assets of about $22.5 million. Again, you can see below the only debt we really have are prepaid pledges for this year that people paid in 2023. And when you see restricted assets, that's just where folks have given money to the church for various reasons, and we have to spend it in a certain way that's not in the trust fund, like the Adele McKee fund that we've had for many years, just to name one. So that will explain what that line item is. But anyway, this is just a brief snap. You'll see the budget in just a minute, but I just wanted to give you a brief snapshot of what our balance sheet looked like and how fortunate we are to have the assets and no debt that we do have. Thanks.
We're going to keep rolling. I know you're having questions, but put them on your sheets. And I'm going to invite Margaret to come forward to talk about the Trinity Trust.
Good evening, everybody. Glad to see so many of you here with us this evening. My goal tonight is to tell you everything you wanted to know about the Trinity Trust Funds in 10 minutes or less. They have been something of a hidden secret at Trinity, and that actually was unintentional. It was not that we were trying to hide them, but just they weren't talked about a whole lot. And over the past few years, a goal of the trustees has been to start talking about the trust funds and to let you know what they are. And we did the same kind of thing we're doing tonight with session last year, and we'll probably do that every couple of years to make sure all the new session members know what the trust funds are for. And we want you to be aware as well. So I'm going to start because it's the first screen here. So who are the trustees and what is their role? The session set up the trust fund to have 7 trustees. And the trust funds were set up back in 1960 by the session at that time. And originally, there was just one trust fund. And then in 1999, so 39 years later, the session divided that into 3 trust funds. And that was the General Trust Fund for bequests and memorial gifts that were not designated for any specific purpose. The Mission Trust Fund for gifts to benefit our mission activities, and the major maintenance and repair, or they called it the Buildings and Grounds at that time. It's now the Carson Major Maintenance and Repairs Fund. And then since that time, 9 other trust funds, where I think there's even been a couple that we've fulfilled the purpose and spent all the money, like the Agape Trust Fund, some of you may remember, set up out of the Generation to Generation campaign. That was theirs to spend, and they did it over many years, and now they've used it all. What are the trustees and what is our role? Okay, the 7 trustees are on your screen, and Bonnie Harris, and Bonnie retires at the end of this year as a trustee, so we're going in reverse order. Myself, Tom Jones, Frank First, John Oglesby, Cindy Ferguson, and Bill Jordan, who just joined as a new trustee. And I'm in my last year as chair, and I'm happy to say that the trustees have elected a chairman-elect, Frank First, who I saw over there. Hi, Frank. And we're excited about that. And so starting next January, he'll be the incoming chair of the trustees. I thought you might like to know some others who have completed 7 years or in recent years or even more. In some cases, Jim Carson, who passed away in the last couple of years, Jim Henderson, Mickey Ben, Charlie Mosley, Scott Wally, and Ann Spear. So we've had a really great group of Trinity members who love the church and really cared about this work for a long time. Okay, let me go back because I want to make sure I kind of did this in a different order than the slides. I realized belatedly. Okay, so back to what are the trust funds? So let's go to the next slide, please, whoever's doing the slides. So some of the trust funds, and I'm sorry this is so small, but this is in your handout. So if you can't see it on the screen, it is on the handout on your table. Some of the trust funds were established through congregational vote. And for example, on this list, the TELC fund, the one that benefits the Trinity Early Learning Center, our daycare center, is one of them. The New Church Development Fund, that was out of the G2G campaign. And I'm forgetting one, but that's one way that the congregation voted back in 2005 to set up a couple of these funds. Another way is when someone dies and they've put it in their will. And one that happened in the last 5 or 6 years, you may be familiar with the Rosemary Kittrell Speakership Fund. She knew that she was going to die of cancer, and she decided that this was something she wanted to do. And she met, none of us knew except Charlie, the chair of the trustees, until her death, and I think probably the minister at that time. But, she loved the idea of doing this. And so Charlie and the powers that be decided that was a really good idea. So at her death, we established that fund, and that has been funding these amazing speakers that have been coming the last few years. And another way trust funds are set up is sometimes people die unexpectedly, and there's a fund set up in memory of them. And there are a couple on the list here. The Brumley Love Morrell Fund. For those of you who've been members a long time, you're familiar with members of the Brumley and Love families. The Morrells are linked by marriage, and they were killed tragically in a plane crash. And so a number of people linked to Trinity died at that time, and the congregation wanted to. There's so much an outpouring of support for those families, and part of it led to this trust fund that supports various mission efforts of interest to different parts of the family. Another one is it's actually called the Love Ministry Impact Fund. This is the old name, the J. Erskine Love Fund. We renamed it a couple of years ago. But that was, J. Erskine Love is the father of people you think of as the senior Love members now, people like Dennis Love, Carol Ann Jernigan, et cetera. So that generation's father, he died unexpectedly, and that fund was set up at that time. And it's a really neat fund that I'll tell you a little bit more about in a minute. And then I guess the fourth way that they're set up is in response to a need of the church that a current member sees and wants to support. And something that happened last year, actually, the Kahn family decided that they would like to set up the Kahn Family Fund for Trinity Employee Development and Wellness. And so they worked with Rebekah to make a plan for how to support our employees, and a lot of, not through their salaries, but education, and if they need counseling, and if they need emergency financial support. This sort of, it's about 6 or 8 different possible topics that they could. And so it actually was the only fund that wasn't used last year because it was so new. But it will be used this year, so you will see that in the end of 2024. So the trustee's primary role is to oversee the trust funds at Trinity, to ensure that the assets are invested wisely and that the disbursements meet donor intent. That's actually a legal requirement. If someone gives for a specific purpose, we're required, and any nonprofit would be required to actually follow their intent. And that part, the investing part of our work, we have invited in a group of people that know a lot about investments to help us with that. And that includes Richard O'Donnell and Mark Stansel and also John Shepard right now, who are serving on that role. So we have an investment policy that the trustees have established. They work within that to and then they come back with recommendations if they think we should make changes to our policy. We also play a leading role in planned giving at Trinity, and more on that in a moment. And we bring a deep commitment to Trinity's ongoing success and to our mission. And if requested, we're available as an informal sounding board to the senior pastor and to the session. One thing I should make clear is that we are not a governing body. We don't make any final decisions for Trinity. Anything that we think we say that, yes, this does meet the intent of the trust fund, then goes to session for approval. So the session is our only governing body. That was not the case early in the church's history, but it is today. So the next question is, how much is in the trust funds and how are the trust funds used? Well, in 2023 was a good year in the market, and thanks to our good investment committee, we did well. So thank you guys. We started the year with $7.6 million. We've received gifts of $163,000. We had a market gain of $1.3 million. We made distributions of $311,000, and we ended the year with $8.9 million. You'll see that kind of at the bottom of your chart there. A few highlights. The general trust fund provided $151,000 to our operating budget. Now, as Mark said, that's 3.7% of our budget. So that is not, covering our budget, but that's 4% of the average value of that trust fund over the past 12 quarters. So we don't want it to be just one quarter because you might have a real high quarter or a low, so you try to average it out so you kind of temper the gains and losses of the market. All bequests and memorial gifts that come undesignated to Trinity, and every year we receive a number of those go into this general trust fund. And so this fund is made up of gifts from many people over many, many years, and we hope it will grow because it's a great, wonderful gift to Trinity, to remember Trinity in your estate planning. The Trinity Early Learning Center has had a couple of really interesting grants, distributions that we helped them with the last couple of years. One was that last year, the elevators in Building A, there's one in the kitchen that you don't even see that they use pretty much, they're the only ones who use, and then there's one in the front entryway that they use heavily to go up and down those, that if you don't want to take the stairs. So they helped their major maintenance and repairs required on those 2 elevators. And so through this fund, they were able to provide half the funding and the church provided the other half. And this year, we helped them with support for scholarships and for some painting they needed to do of some cabinets. The Love Ministry Impact Fund. Last year, we did all this painting and recarpeting, and then we noticed that our furniture in the lobby, what little of it there was, didn't look very good. So the Love Ministry Impact Fund provided the funding to help with the new furniture and the new pictures that are in the room that used to be the old library. A lot of different things. It's amazing with just a little bit of money. It was $35,000 is a lot of money in a way, but a lot of good things happen. And this year, 2023 actually, they provided funding that is being in the process of being spent for new sacred pieces, like for a new communion table for the sanctuary, things for that purpose, like a communion plate and this sort of thing for the loft. Our children are now acolytes. There's some expenses involved with that. So, it's involved with all those kinds of things that were something that was very important. And the nice thing about this fund is It's meant to do something different every year. And you can have ideas, session can have ideas, staff, trustees, and then Rebekah and the clerk of session come up with which is the best idea and the most needed for this year. So 2024, a new year, so bring your ideas. So there are a lot of great things going on with these funds. Our current goals, back to the beginning, first are to help you be more aware of what we're doing, and so that you don't feel like they're a secret, you understand them, you recognize that the trust funds, although it is a lot of money, it's not money, most of it doesn't go to support our operating budget. It's some of the extra things that we like to do. So it's a wonderful thing to have. Number two, we want to, we're really trying to make sure we proactively use the trust funds to support our mission. I was very happy when I saw this report that all the trust funds, except the brand new one, have been used last year. And that's been a goal. Some of the funds were kind of just maybe sitting there a little bit, not doing a whole lot. They were just growing, which was nice, but people gave them for a purpose. And we decided this is really during 2021. Jim Carson and I were on the church budget work group when we had to cut our budget, you may recall. And we were both kind of drawn to the idea that we ought to be using the trust funds more proactively. And I think the trustees have really liked that idea, and that has been happening. And finally, we want to restart a more proactive planned giving program. So the planned giving program is going to encourage members to consider Trinity in their estate plans. And there's a variety of ways you can do that, which we will try to be providing some opportunities to learn more about. I'm very happy to say that trustees Cindy Ferguson and Tom Jones have agreed to co-chair that effort. And so you'll hear more about that soon. So that's my report. I look forward to your questions, and I just want to say that it's been a joy to do this work, and I think it's a blessing that we have this wonderful trust funds, and so thank you all for your support.
That's better. A little applause in the middle is a great thing. So quickly, I want to share with you the outcomes of our 2024 commitment campaign. Hopefully this graphic is familiar to you because you all got this in the mail last October, and it's been on our website all these months, and we've been using it in all of our publications about this campaign. Our theme was Forward in Faith, and we've shown there the percentage breakdown of our 2023 budget. And then the things that have arrows sort of pointing in are goals that we set for 2024 that would require additional funding. So over the 2023 budget in order to be able to do these new things and where they would fit into these sort of big buckets within our budget. Hoping you all remember that. Some of the things we're focused on are expanding our advocacy work, our mission partnerships, particularly since Mission Council has really zeroed in on goals related to education, anti-hunger initiatives, and then the broad advocacy category. We are moving as fast as we can toward a new database and expanded communications platforms. I know you all want it. You can say a little quiet clap. We're going to get there hopefully this year. That has a cost associated with it, of course. One of the priorities that came out of the sessions visioning work in my first year here was the felt need for more wellness and recreation opportunities here in an organized way. Everything from kids and adults playing basketball to organizing opportunities for people who are not necessarily members or part of our church community to be on campus, to be with us, to use our beautiful trails, to learn about the birds that are protected here, to do yoga and Tai Chi and learn about nutrition and do meditation. We have the space, and this is a way that we can be welcoming people and really engaging in the mission of offering community and being a space of wellness. To do that well, we need someone, a person, to coordinate that. So adding a director of wellness and recreation to our staff is an immediate priority. That also should help us further monetize our building and realize more building use revenue. That was one of the lines that was mentioned earlier, and you'll see it when we get to the budget for this year. Again, That is the kind of thing that helps us have outreach far beyond saying your one chance to know Trinity is to come at 11 a.m. on Sunday morning, right? You can know Trinity from all sorts of perspectives, but we need someone who can coordinate all of that. We need, and we'll talk about this in a minute, further property maintenance. We've been underfunding the annual budget side of the property for quite a while, relying on some hoped for reserves to fill in the gap, and we're going to close that gap this year, I'm so glad to say. And then Margaret just mentioned the Sacred Furnishings project that we're working on. We also hope to really, I hope to really focus on the 9 o'clock service this year. It was a priority for me the first year, but some other things came up. And we will be streamlining that and enhancing particularly our engagement with the band. We don't have a lot of regular 9 o'clockers in this room as I'm looking around. It's a wonderful service. Yes, the Jacksons are back. You're in your same seats where you sit in the loft. That's where they sit at 9 o'clock as well. Bill sometimes comes to 9. The Hobbses do. I see some 9 o'clockers in here. That space has been sort of a blank slate. And that's part of its beauty and power, that it can be used for all kinds of things. And this year, we're going to create the opportunity to make it specifically into a worship space while it's being used as a worship space, with some investment in things that can then be moved out. So those are some of the expressed goals for our campaign. And here's how it went. We had a goal of $3.75 million, and unofficially, my goal was to have 500 pledges from adults or households. That is, that's an increase over last year, both in dollars and participation. Those are the same goals I just went through. As of today, we have $3,836,970. So that's surpassing the goal. Thanks be to God. That number is from 474 adult or household pledging units. That's 64% of our possible pledging units. So that is a moment of opportunity ahead of us, that we could have more of our community participating. We mailed 738 household packets. Another thing we did this year that I think was really wonderful, and I hope we can have even more momentum coming from it as an education and spiritual discipline opportunity, we mailed a separate, different packet to every child and youth in this church with their own pledge card. It was actually really cool. And Stan Tilley said, can we use the kid one for adults next year? It was a great pledge card. Their own letter written to them, not the same letter that went out to adults. And 11 of them pledged. From those 11, one tried to pledge a whole bunch of her parents' money, which was delightful. And I told her parents that we would be glad to accept that. But they were thoughtful about it. They thought about what they get in allowance. And I had a beautiful conversation I might never forget with a teenager with a part-time job who was thinking for the first time about what she makes and what 10% of what she makes is. May we all hear that lesson. And to have 11 of those pledges with people who are now on a weekly basis thinking about giving to their church at a young age is truly a witness and something that we continue to build on. 52 new pledges, people who had not pledged in the past. That's a wonderful number for us to celebrate. Those represent $120,000. We had 196 pledges increase. Again, that's something wonderful to celebrate. Total increase of 239,000. 42 decreased pledges over 2023 for a total decrease of 197,519. We kicked off the campaign about a month earlier than had been the past practice. So we started October 6th and we finished yesterday. That is still a long time, friends. That is still a long time. That is a named opportunity in front of us for us all to be in such a habit of being ready to give to our church that we don't have to actually be in a campaign for so many months of the year. It's also an opportunity for us to continue to pull back toward the beginning of the calendar year so that session is able to responsibly plan and set a budget as early as possible. So session will be, I hope, I pray, adopting a budget budget at its February meeting. But what that means is that for that many weeks into the year, we've been operating, but without certainty about what the allocations would be, about what staff compensation packages would be. We would like to be able to know that and lock it in even sooner. So there's a momentum to carry forward. A couple of reference points, some from the past and some just questions that I get asked a lot. In 2023, our campaign goal was 3.5 million. So you see, this is a wonderful increase year over year, really something to celebrate. We received 444 pledges last year. So again, we've increased participation. Again, something to celebrate. Pledged giving last year accounted for 92% of our operating budget. We currently have, or as of December 31, had 1,625 members. That includes our member adults and confirmed young people, so not teenagers and not children. And we pay to the Presbyterian Church USA $28.80 per 1,625 members. So I sometimes get asked questions about whether the church has a cost to keeping people on the rolls is sort of the phrasing. And that answer is actually yes, there is a cost to the church for having active members participating in our denomination. It is not a significant amount of money, and it is a representation of our commitment to the connectional church of which we are a part. But if we have active members who are giving $0 and we are paying $28.80, you all can do that math. I am often asked, what are the averages? And averages are always hard, right? Because they depend on what you decide to include in your math equation. I choose not to put an average pledge here because that will skew in some way or another. But some numbers that perhaps are helpful reference points as you're thinking about how finances work at this church and maybe in your own lives. If we took our operating budget and divided it as a cost per active member, that cost would be $2,600 per active member per year to keep this ministry going. $2,600 per person, per household, $5,725. We'll let that be right there. And I'm going to turn us over to Heather so that she can talk about some results from last year and segue into the 2024 budget.
Thank you. Several of the things I have to talk about have been referenced in some way or shape or form previously because the budget feeds all of the financials that we have discussed here. But this slide here is just to show you kind of how our pledges and our operating results work through the year. Mark referenced the low months earlier, a line of credit to maybe fund the times when the pledged giving is lower. And this graph just gives you an idea of, we have a good bit of pledged income that comes in at the beginning of the year. Guess what that is? That's that $428,000 of the prepaid pledges that then get reflected on our books in January. That's why there's a peak of giving in January. We also have a good number of members who like to honor their commitment. They do it right away and they get that done for the year in January. And then we kind of go through slower periods of giving while our expenses remain fairly consistent through the year, mainly because personnel is the primary driver in our property expenses. Those don't vary much from month to month. And then all of a sudden, the end of the year, the generosity is just overflowing. And actually, when the Finance Committee met in November, they reviewed the October results. It didn't look like there was anything to be like jumping up and down and cheering about. It wasn't bad, but it was not like, oh my goodness, this is more than we'd ever expect. But then come January, when we had our finance committee meeting, it was like, oh my goodness, we got a lot in December. So I'm, being fairly new, I'm still learning those trends as well. And that will help inform how we run and make decisions. But one of the things about the church, and next slide, please. We've referenced this a lot as well as the sources of revenue. And that's that 93% comes from the congregation's contributions. And part of the reason Trinity does not have the line of credit or doesn't have debt is the responsible budgeting practice of budgeting based on your estimates of giving. The budget, and that's also why the budget is not set already too, is we wait until we have the estimates of giving to set the budget. That is not how all churches operate. There are churches that take a variety, they go through historical trends and economic factors, and they make their own estimate of what will come in apart from pledges and set a budget for the year. And sometimes they're right and sometimes they're wrong. And then those might be the ones that end up with having to take out those lines of credit or having to take on debt here. Trinity is very fiscally responsible. So just a little bit about the budgeting practice. As we all know, the budget is a critical financial tool in order for us to steward the resources that are being entrusted to us to do God's work here at Trinity. And when we approach the budget process, we carefully consider internal and external factors to estimate what our expenses are going to be. And every priority must line up with the mission of making God's love visible. And there's session-directed priorities here. It's not what finance staff has in mind to do when setting the budget. And as I said, pledges set the baseline. Current year pledges, Rebekah, I think we'll go to the next slide. We'll come back to that one. Let's go one more. Okay, this is where we are with our working draft of the 2024 budget. And as you can see, right now, current year pledges are accounting for 88%. We discount those by 4%. And that's just based on our historical payment percentages there. It's not, it's not any present value of the pledges and when we anticipate, we don't go through any of those calculations there. It's just, we operate on a cash basis, and it's how much of the money that has been pledged do we expect to receive during the current fiscal year. And then, as you see, we also account for receiving pledges that people made promises to make that they're going to, last year, that they're going to actually fulfill this year. So we're estimating that we will receive around $55,000 in pledges this year that were 2023 pledges here. The other parts of the income that come into play in the budget are the trust fund income, which has been referenced, and then the line that says other income, that is primarily made up of interest. It's a little bit larger than it had been 2 and 3 years ago because of where interest rates stand right now. And the Finance Committee has chosen to put the cash reserves in a money market account that, as we talked about also earlier, has then been put in part of what's called the IntraFi process, so that we only have $250,000 on deposit with a single institution, so we're not at risk there. All of our money is FDIC insured. So simultaneous with the commitment campaign, the Finance Committee seeks input from each ministry area. As Richard was talking about earlier, we have liaisons to different ministry areas, and along with the staff people. So each committee chair and their related staff person receives a budget worksheet, and they are invited, and the budget worksheet has the budget and the actuals for the preceding 4 years, and they are invited to consider their budget and to think about what they want to do in the upcoming year and to make a request for what they would like for their budget to be going forward. And I invited each of the committee chairs and their staff person to come meet with me. Some took us up on that opportunity. The YFM staff have, being new to their roles, they have actually begun the practice of meeting with me monthly to review their budgets and understand their spending, and have really shown that they understand how the money that they're spending connects to the ministry that they are doing there. And it just helps build a strong comprehension of the choices that they are making as they spend the money that has been entrusted to them through a budget. And I will continue to make myself available to those throughout the year. Anyone who has a question about the budget or the details of what things are being spent on. Most committees just requested a modest increase when it came to when they reviewed their budgets for 2024. And that's reflected here. You'll see there's not a lot of large jumps. One thing that we did look at is reviewed a capital plan for the church and what we really need to be budgeting for the expenses with this property. And that did require us to start making some increases to the property budget there. Property, as you all know, in your own homes, those expenses don't go down. They just keep going up. And that is the same here at church as well. And while we have this beautiful facility and these many acres, there is a cost to maintaining and running them. That's a place where we have an opportunity for building use, such as through these wellness activities, to help support some of the cost of the property. It will have a wear and tear, but the revenue that would come in will far exceed, we have the wear and tear anyway. The gym is being used, the floor has to be refinished. It would be nice to have some revenue to offset that there. The big part, and we can go back to the slide just before this, is, as you all know, ministry is relational. And it goes without saying that the church needs staff to help members to carry out the mission. And Trinity has been just below the industry standard in terms of numbers of staff for the past few years. Not budgeted numbers, but actual. The reason we have these gaps in 2022 and 2023 between budget and actual is because of being understaffed, below what we had desired levels. You will notice the average FTE at the bottom, and in 2018, the average FTE was 27, and in 2023, it was 18. So we are, we're operating at a much lower staff level than we had been. And you would expect to see personnel increases, personnel costs rise over time, because you would expect to see kind of stable staffing levels and then cost of living adjustments going along. And so that's not what's reflected in our budget here. And that's where you see the work of the budget work group when we had to make an adjustment to meet budget come in. And so now we're coming out of that somewhat. We expect some of those costs, and hopefully, and not that 27 was the right number and 18 is too low of a number, but there's going to be a happy medium somewhere in the middle there. And so we'll need to work and plan for that over the long term here. At the last Finance Committee meeting, we discussed the desire to develop a 5-year financial plan to identify goals and priorities and to anticipate any potential obstacles and strengths that could impact the church, and to really enable us to articulate a vision for stability and ministry growth. And so one of the things that we also have referenced this evening is our eagerness to have an improved database. And with the availability of a tool such as that, coupled with consistent, accurate record keeping, it's my hope that we're going to be in a really good position to analyze our giving households and giving trends, and to really be able to critically evaluate budgeting decisions in light of how they can help us create long-term stability for the church. And for us to really see where are we going, not just to be in December and think, oh, we've got to hurry and get a budget set in January or February, but that we can be looking long-term and say, okay, here is where we are now, and here is where we want to go, and what's our path of getting there. And really hoping that, the database will be one of those little pieces of the puzzle that helps us put that together here. But the budget, the bottom line is, everybody contributes and participates to the budgeting process. It's not done by one individual or a small group of individuals. It's done with many people's input, and no one is told, don't ask for that. Like, shoot for the moon. One thing that has been surprising to me is people's reluctance to ask. And some of it is, being realistic about things, and being realistic about what you're able to do in your ministry area. Like, some of it is, I can't ask for more because I don't have the energy or the time to carry out one more thing. But we want to be able to empower our staff, our members, the committees, to be able to dream and envision how to grow ministry, to grow their work, and for then us to be able to come by and give the resources and the support that they need. So that's about it on the budget.
I am so happy to say that we are running 45 seconds ahead of schedule tonight. And we're going to open for questions, and we'll have mics, I guess. Lucy, are we going to run mics? Who has a question? Let us know.
I don't believe no one has a question.
I don't either. David does. It was just who was going to go first.
Yes. Oh, wow. Do the decreased pledges include members who have died and moved on to other churches, or is that just people who are active members and have reduced their pledges?
The decreased pledges are not. I will say this, those who have died or moved on to other churches are not reflected in that decreased number. So that is there as well. The decreased pledges are people who are here and for some reason have changed their pledge amount. Some of it is, I'm moving from being a full-time working person to being on a fixed income, and I've got to change what my pledge level is there. There's a variety of reasons. Some of it might be last year there was something really big that happened and I was able to give a whole lot more, and this year that's not my circumstance. So none of it seemed to be a dissatisfaction with the church, and anybody who had a real significant decrease generally let us know why. They didn't want us to think that it was an expression of dissatisfaction, if that makes sense at all.
And then just as a follow-up, how does our participation rate compare to what is considered normal among churches?
I don't know how to answer that. Do you have an answer to that?
I will tell you this. I actually dug through to try to look for statistics. There's so many different kinds of churches out there. And there's so many different communities. It's really hard to find something to compare ourselves to. But one thing I did find that I thought was really interesting came out of a 2023 survey that was released in June of 2023. And it said the average per person gift for mainline Protestant churches was $2,700 per year. And so our average cost, I think, was less than that. So we're not even, like, if we had the per person giving at that level, and that was an average, then we would be above our budget level right now. I don't know if that answers it all there, but I do think there's a real opportunity for increased number of participants.
I will say there are many congregations that don't make financial support voluntary, right? So there are churches who have dues, membership dues, and who charge for participating in programs beyond your $10 to offset your spaghetti dinner cost. And we do not, right? This is a purely voluntary, even our pledge form, it says at the bottom, this is a non-binding pledge. It's helping us to anticipate, but we're not going after people in any legal way, right? To demand, I don't think, if you are, let me know. We're not functioning in that sort of set requirement, and those churches have a much higher level because membership is contingent on financial support. But in terms of, pledges, even how mainline churches do or don't do pledging, as Heather mentioned earlier, some churches don't even do a campaign. They don't do pledges. They have varied wildly on how they approach congregational giving. So we'll do some looking and see if we can find peer comparators. This is also information about which even our friendly peer congregations do not share data. I'm serious. I don't mean that to be ugly. They just don't want to talk about it. So it's hard to kind of know that number. So I choose to just think about it as we're talking about us, right? And without any minimum pledge or any expectation or requirement, we still would hope that everyone is participating somehow, in some way. Yeah, Sam. Yeah. You want to answer David? Okay, great.
Just a comment related to that, having worked with an awful lot of finance committees of Presbyterian churches over the last number of years. There are a lot of churches that are somewhere around half of their giving units that make pledges. And I would hope saying that would never give us any opportunity to rest on our laurels or say, oh, we can, back off or anything like that. And I have had seen congregations that has a certain goal and wildly missed it, but made a wild effort to say, just for fun, we're going to ask for a 100% response on the cards, whatever your intentions are. Just tell us as a way of further engagement. But right now, if you've got 64, I'll say that's more than a lot of congregations get in terms of stated pledges.
Thanks, Sam. Other questions? Sadler.
When you're talking about database improvement, are you talking about something like Racer's Edge, Donor View, that sort of thing?
Yes, but we're talking about a database that really is for a broader purpose. So how many of you have the Church Life app on your phones? Okay. All of you can, and it is a very, very useful tool. It is multiple modules, and the one you will see and use most often on your phone is people, right? You're looking up somebody's, you need their phone number, their email. You want to see when their birthday is, or you're putting a face with a name. You met somebody or saw a name and you want to see what that person looks like. So all of our our past member, our prospective member, our children, our baptisms, all our records are stored in a database. It also has our financial module in it. And it also has the capacity to include our facility scheduler in it, although Trinity uses a different platform for that. The one we use is a big one. It's ACS, which is something church systems. Who knows what the A is? Let's say Associated Church Systems. I don't know what the A is, but it's one that a lot of large mainline churches use. It is a clunky system, and we are excited about moving to either a totally new platform or to the next generation of offering from the ACS company, which will help us have clean data. It will help us all access it faster and for much better use for things like simple things like being in touch with each other, knowing what skills and gifts our members have. This happened today. I was in a conversation with Elizabeth Borland, and we said, who do we have who's an employment lawyer? And I said, I wish I could put employment lawyer into the database and see whose name comes up. That kind of tracking system is what we're talking about. The next generation of our current database also has much more capacity for members to do their own improvement and updating of their own records, to put in their desire to serve, their willingness to track their own giving, to register for events, and to see each other, right? To communicate with each other without coming through the church as sort of the the center of the wheel. So we're talking about a pretty significant migration of data when we do it. Does that answer your question? That was a long answer.
That does. Sounds like a lot of work.
Amen. Amen. I'm not doing that work, thanks be to God. Heather and our exceptional new colleague, Janet Martin, if you all haven't met her, and probably haven't because she's a weekday person, Janet is doing really the bulk of that nitty-gritty, tracking down the records, finding the places where we have duplicates, finding the places where someone who's 57 years old is still listed as a child in our database, correcting all of that so that when we make that change, we're moving good data into a new system. Thank you, God, for Janet Martin. Jenny Hobbs.
Hang on, Jenny. I don't want to miss a really good question.
So real quick, under property, we have 763,900. What's the wish list for that? Like if you could wave a magic wand and say, we want, a cash reserve for property, what does that look like?
Yeah. Oh, I appreciate that question, Jenny.
'Cause
So Heather mentioned that there's a 20-year capital expense budget for our campus. And David Caldwell, I don't think he's in here. Is David Caldwell in here? He loves this document. It's his favorite thing. I think he probably keeps it under his pillow, the 20-year capital expense needs of our church. He updates it constantly, just paying attention to depreciation and the timelines for the life of various equipment and the need to do things like recarpet and paint and re-roof and replace HVACs and all of that. That price tag, if we broke that down as an annual number and we're planning to do that work annually, it would average out to almost $600,000 a year. Just for that. That's not the utilities and actually keeping all the things running for our property. Luckily, all those things don't come up at the same time, so that is not an equal need year over year. So what has started to happen this year that's such an exciting and good change, in recent history, Trinity has been putting about $40,000 a year into that line where we would need 600 if it were averaged, 40,000 versus 600,000. Y'all can tell which of these is bigger, but which is not enough. So we've deferred maintenance, which is what all churches do. That's not unique to Trinity. We've deferred maintenance. We corrected a lot of that with the recent infrastructure work. And this year, we are being more realistic about how much needs to go into that line in the operating budget to ensure that we're not caught off guard with a pretty significant capital need. And Heather has gone, I think, through a really laborious process to try to identify not just average amount over 20 years, but which of the needs are coming up in which years so that we can start to move more precisely an amount into that line each year. That is not glamorous stuff, right? The things that are in David Caldwell's precious spreadsheet are not mostly things you see. They're mostly systems improvements, things like resurfacing the parking lot, replacing pavement, bricks, gutters, drains, right? I mean, this is the kind of stuff that has to happen, but it's also pretty hard stuff to raise money for because most people don't want to do drains until they don't work anymore. And then you wish, right, until there's a flooding situation, which we've had here in the last year. Did that answer your question, Jenny?
Do we expect a capital campaign anytime in the next 3 to 5 years?
Not three. Not three. I don't know about 5. I'm not being glib. I don't know about 5. The infrastructure campaign, for a very, very reasonable amount of money, did an exceptional amount of work and really put us on such a solid footing so that at the moment, we really are not behind, right? There's no major capital project that is urgent and got left out. So that's a great place to be. So as we find things that have to be replaced, we'll have to make a decision year over year, whether they fit into that annualized or whether we have to hold them for a few more years. And we are in a place to be thinking about a missional calling as well, so that any capital campaign we do, hopefully because of the good work that just happened, is not so rooted in physical space, if that makes sense. 5 years, I think, would be the soonest we would do another, but I am not already planning one in my head. Yeah, Alan. Hang on, Lucy's coming. Run, Lucy, run.
Wasn't on the track team.
Kind of a related question. The expense category right behind that is mission. What kind of strategic priorities are in place for us to increase mission, local, state, world, et cetera, over the next 3 to 5 years?
Lucy, if you want to come speak to this, you absolutely can. I'll talk while you walk. How about that? So a couple of things. Mission is so deeply rooted in this church, right? It is absolutely at the heart of who we are and why we're here. If you all didn't believe that God was at work in the world, you wouldn't have come out tonight, and the money wouldn't matter, frankly. So everything we do here is mission. So I want to name for a second that the label mission is really talking about one part of a whole panoply of ministries, all of which are our participation in God's mission. So even as I'm teasing about the drains overflowing, and we're talking about the cost of resurfacing the gym floor, inviting kids to play basketball here is part of our mission, right? Inviting people to walk on our campus and not be slogging through overflowed drains. That is mission. We're providing hospitality and welcome. We have really, really prioritized offering our campus in support of other organizations as they are living out their mission this year. And that, quite frankly, is very easy for us to do. And we have this asset. It's a great gift. So we've hosted things like the record restriction event, where we partnered with the Georgia Justice Project in the fall and helped over 100 people get their criminal records restricted so that they could get housing and jobs. We didn't plan that. What we did was say, come be here. We have space enough. And this room was converted into a mobile DA's office. Judge McAfee sat right here and signed orders all day long. And some lawyers who are in this room met with clients in this very space. So that is mission as well. And I want to name that before we talk about what's in the mission budget, because it's a little bit misleading when we think that the only mission we're doing or spending is that one line, when in fact, really all of it is. Meanwhile, we do have a line with that name on it, and maybe we think about renaming it at some point for clarity. But our mission council works most closely with Lucy as their fearless leader, most closely with their 3 priorities that I mentioned earlier: are advocacy, education, and addressing food insecurity and hunger in our communities. They work very closely with our official mission partners and also to consider how we might bring both financial and people resources alongside others' work in the world. And one of the things that's a real shift in our culture over the last two generations, maybe three, is that, several generations ago, when people thought about philanthropy, they were thinking of something totally different from how that looks in the modern world. And a lot of people, if they were going to give some money to something that was charitable, they would give it maybe to a school, maybe to a civic organization, but for sure to their church. And the expectation was that the church would then distribute that money out. For a lot of reasons, philanthropy has been democratized. So everyone in this room can and does, I feel sure, share of their financial resources to a lot of organizations that are doing good in the world, but they don't give that money through their church anymore. They just do it directly, right? Do it online. You all get these calls. My goodness, Giving Tuesday, how many texts did you get on Giving Tuesday? Because now organizations have done the same thing churches have also done, which is to capture the information of anyone who has contact with them and to constantly communicate need and reach out to ask for gifts. And people give. But their expectation when they give to their church is not really any longer that is the way they're giving to other organizations in the world. So as our mission budget has shifted, less and less of that is required to be given out. And some of it is, and we do that in very careful and thoughtful ways. More and more, what we're doing is partnering long-term with organizations with which we have a mutual relationship and where we're not just giving money, but we're supporting with finances and we're participating. We're going to show up as people and help do the work and learn and grow. So that was a long answer, but this is really Lucy, so pick it up there, Lucy.
That was pretty good. I don't know that anything else needs to be added much. Except to say that there is some discernment that happens in that. As with almost all our committees and leadership at Trinity, nothing happens quickly, and that's okay because it means we are thoughtfully thinking and discerning. It took us a year or so to decide what are the priorities that we want to set forth for our church: education, advocacy, and food insecurity. And then it's thinking about, okay, now what are the organizations out there doing that work? Because while we are a room full of very intelligent and God-fearing people, there are also people who are smarter than us. So it's about finding those places, those organizations that we know and trust that some of you are already giving to and you introduce us to, that some of it is Rebekah and I going out into the world and finding, that some of it is people who come to us and ask, what needs do they have? So instead of us trying to create something new or tell everyone else how they ought to do it right, we are actually finding those places that are already doing it right and just need us. And that is a scary moment because it's much easier and more efficient to give a check sometimes. It is much harder to put ourselves in places where we're not the smartest person in the room. And that's what Mission Council is doing regularly. That's what Faith in Action is, a committee that's come out of Mission Council, a subcommittee. That's the work they're doing. And when we do have those moments where we come for the record restriction or whatever it might be, going to the food bank, every time we're learning and every time we're thinking, okay, what is the next big thing that Trinity's going to do? That's a question Rebekah and I get asked a lot. What is the next big thing? And my hope is following God's voice out into the world, and we'll figure out what that is as we keep going. So I hope that kind of answers your question.
Thanks for that question. What else? Are y'all sleepy? Kurt.
So the one item I see that's reduced from last year to this year is commitment. And
that's
we're
just
talking about getting more people involved. Just tell me the thought process.
That's just the cost of the campaign. So how much we spend for printing and postage.
It's mostly volunteer like it's always been.
Yeah, and we didn't spend that 9 this year, so that's based on actuals.
Thank you.
We can do more with less. Bill.
Made that easy for me.
Close one. You raised the topic of how philanthropy has changed and is continuing to change in America. And it makes me think of, are there opportunities for us to recognize the new modalities people attach to and get energized around? Yeah, I'm thinking about things like, how many GoFundMes did you see last year, and how many did you put money on, right? Vehicles that are not the traditional way that churches think about doing business, quote unquote, might be an essential complement to connect with a generation of people who think in tiny chunks about how they want to reach out and help others. So that, and I'm just thinking in what is a pretty limited, maybe crass financial sense. I think the other aspect to me that, as you describe it, becoming more transparent and continuous, perhaps, about our discussions around the finances of the church, is that spiritual component of why we're giving. It isn't the same why as when we cut a check to United Way or our favorite playhouse.
Amen. I think we just found our next campaign chair. Bill Borland. No, I'm not even teasing. That's exactly right. I mean, this is different, right? It should be fundamentally different from the reason you give to your alma mater. And some of the things that used to be baked in culturally, particularly in the South, are not baked in anymore. So giving to a church at all, that is not, it's not a given in the way that 2-3 generations ago, I know your grandparents did not mow their grass on Sundays, right? This is a different world. And so having even the expectation that you would give anything to church has shifted. How much has shifted, right? The conversation about tithe is very tricky and sticky now. How you give, right? The discipline of first fruits, which is a biblical notion that whatever you have received, before you do anything else with it, you're going to give back God's share of that, whatever that is. That'll preach. But that is uncomfortable for people now in a way that, frankly, a few generations ago, that would have been like, oh, here we go again. We got to talk about the first fruits, right? And so part of the mentality that has changed is even the idea of giving. And to your point, all the generational studies show that generations, the one younger than me and below, do not give to institutions. They're not thinking about this campus and its sustainability long term. They might be thinking about its environmental sustainability. They may not care at all about the access to parking. But if we are a missional organization and our purpose is igniting, that is what will motivate people to give. So we live kind of straddling those generations because we have them all here. People are motivated for different reasons. Our challenge, more than anything, is communicating all of that with a time of life where, not age of life, this season in our culture where people's attentions for those communications are very short. But I think, to your point, Bill, we will have to be nimble and creative about how we not only talk about money, but how we pursue giving in this congregation. I think we have to, like any organization. If we continued to do the same thing year over year forever, we would lose our younger generations, except for those 11 who made a pledge. 2 of them are Le Mans, I'm just going to say. We're up to 12. We got one tonight?
I checked my email.
Fantastic. That's great. That is great. I don't know. So I want to say one more quick thing about Bill's question, which is the GoFundMe culture. So part of what's so appealing about a GoFundMe is that it's for such a discrete purpose, right? It's just for one thing. It's just one need. It's usually an emergency. It's usually something horrible that happened to somebody we love, and we're acting out of compassion. That is a very hard method to sustain for an organization with ongoing needs across all kinds of ministry areas and for all of time. So the instinct to do something quick, I think, is one we can build on. We have to be very careful, and I even had a conversation with a colleague about this yesterday. We have to be very careful about fundraising for things outside our unified budget, because otherwise the drains will never, ever get done. So that's a yes and is my answer. What else? How are we doing? 8:07. Oh, we're over now. No other questions? Gentle crowd, I know. Thanks for that. Yeah. All right. Well, then, friends, if you have, thanks. If you have any questions that you think of later, feel free to reach out to us. There are no secrets, again, and we are happy to talk about this because this just positions us in an even better way to go forward and do what we're going to do. We did record tonight, so if you have friends who weren't able to be here, we're going to send this out with the happy news about our final numbers for the 2024 commitment campaign this weekend, and you'll be able to watch again and think about whatever, but email any of us. You two got no questions over there. How did that go? I am particularly grateful for these folks, and I know you all are too. We are led well on our finance team, staff, and lay leadership. Anything I'm forgetting, Lucy? Okay, take a sandwich to go. I see lots of extras back there. Pack it in your lunch tomorrow. Thank you all. Go in peace.